Welcome back to The Explainer, everyone. Today we're diving into something, well, honestly, it's pretty intense. We are taking a purely clinical, completely objective look at a massively controversial manifesto that's been generating a ton of discussion online. We're going to be dissecting a specific ideology put forward by the YouTube channel PsyOps. This source presents a very raw, unflinching, and intensely debated perspective on modern dating, gender dynamics, and specifically female aging. Now, our goal today isn't to take a side or endorse these viewpoints, but rather to break down the actual mechanics of the argument. We want to understand the root of the intense friction we see in modern dating culture every single day, and examine exactly what is supposedly driving this huge divide.
So, here's our roadmap. We're going to define the expired goods theory itself, look at the illusion of inherent value, move into the invisibility phase, contrast front-loaded and back-loaded value, analyze the psychology of panic, and finally, wrap up by exploring the biological argument used to tie it all together. Let's get right into it.
All right, starting off with Section 1, the expired goods theory, and its highly controversial biological perspective.
To really grasp this ideology, we have to start right at the core with its absolute harshest terminology. Expired goods. That is the deliberate, unflinching phrase this creator uses to explain modern female anger and behavior. This whole worldview insists that when we see societal friction, skyrocketing divorce rates, or just seemingly irrational behavior in the dating market, we are completely misdiagnosing the cause. According to the source, this isn't a political issue. It's not about equality. It is framed entirely as biological terror. It's the sheer, absolute panic of realizing that a woman's primary societal currency, which they define strictly as youth and fertility, is perceived to have devalued.
Just listen to how the creator frames this in their own words. They say, "The chaos you see isn't political. It's biological terror. It is the primal scream of a creature realizing that its primary currency has just been devalued to zero." A primal scream. By positioning this conflict as an inescapable biological reality instead of, a societal construct, this ideology just strips away all political correctness to look at the cold, mechanical gears underneath. It sets the stage for an incredibly fatalistic view of how men and women interact.
Which brings us to Section 2, the illusion of inherent value, and what the video refers to as the superpower of youth.
This theory maps out a highly specific, totally unforgiving life cycle. It goes something like this. Right around age 14, society basically hands young women a superpower. It's a mix of potential, youth, and fertility. At her peak, say around 25, a woman experiences a world where doors just open effortlessly, mistakes are forgiven, and attention is completely constant. But here's the trap. The argument goes that women mistake this temporary biological lottery ticket for intrinsic personal worth. So by the time the slow erosion begins in the early 30s, leading up to a blunt expiration date at 40, a woman's internal sense of self catastrophically fractures from the reality of how society actually treats her.
And this timeline feeds into a much broader societal critique. The argument here is that men and women are raised on fundamentally incompatible beliefs about their own worth. Think about it. Women are allegedly sold the myth of inherent value, taught both explicitly and implicitly that they're perfect queens simply for existing. Men, on the other hand, carry the burden of performance. From boyhood, they're taught they have zero inherent value. They literally have to constantly earn respect, wealth, and worthiness through relentless effort. This beautiful lie told to women, the creator argues, eventually comes to collect a devastating debt.
That perceived debt collection leads right into our third section, the invisibility phase. The creator describes this as a literal psychological torture chamber.
Imagine the shock to the system here. The invisibility phase is defined as this subtle but totally devastating transition that hits in the early 30s. Picture a woman walking into a room. She's dressed the same, she feels the exact same on the inside, but the external reaction has drastically changed. That invisible magnetic field of attention that always pulled eyes toward her, it's just been switched off. At first, maybe she blames the venue, or the lighting, or the people around her. But eventually, the crushing realization hits. She is the variable that has changed.
The creator puts it like this. For a woman, attention is oxygen. When that attention fades, she doesn't just feel ignored, she feels like she is ceasing to exist. Comparing attention to the very air we breathe, that is a remarkably powerful metaphor for the intense psychological unraveling they're describing, because her identity was supposedly built entirely on being the center of attention, like a celebrity perpetually on a red carpet. When that attention bypasses her for the new girl, she becomes a ghost in her own life. It's not just a matter of feeling ignored, it's absolute existential erasure.
You can see the stark contrast in how society supposedly treats these two ages. At 25, visibility and value are maxed out. Cameras flash, drinks are free, the world caters to her presence. But fast forward to 40, this worldview claims the societal treatment shifts to cold, polite indifference. Notice the language used here. It's intentionally straight out of retail. Women are treated like inventory, literally passed over for fresh stock. It is an extremely transactional, ruthlessly market-based way of viewing human relationships.
And this transactional view, it's really the philosophical linchpin of the whole manifesto. Let's look at Section 4, front-loaded versus back-loaded value.
According to the brutal math of this so-called sexual marketplace, men and women are on completely opposing trajectories. Women's value is viewed as entirely front-loaded. They start out with all their biological currency right there in their youth, and then slowly, inevitably, they lose it. Men's value, conversely, is back-loaded. They start with nothing and slowly build it up by amassing resources and status. By the time they both hit 40, they are literally ships passing in the night. The man is stepping into his absolute prime earning and confidence years, while the woman is, according to this, watching the sunset of her utility.
So, how exactly do people react to this perceived devaluation? That brings us to Section 5, the psychology of panic.
The crucial point the video makes here is that women allegedly do not accept this transition gracefully. Instead of pivoting to find value in things like wisdom or stability, they completely panic. The creator points to everyday actions, using fillers, dressing like teenagers, relying on heavy photo filters, freezing eggs late in life, and completely strips away any personal agency. In this framework, they aren't personal choices or fun fashion trends. They are categorized instead as desperate camouflage, used to trick the predator of time and the dating market. It's described like stacking up sandbags against an inevitable flood. This panic then translates into a deep, consuming resentment, particularly toward men who date younger women, because those men act as a literal mirror, reflecting her own expiration date. The source says, she clings to the label expired goods not as a truth to be accepted, but as an injustice to be fought. She wages war on biology. The ego prevents her from accepting this devaluation, because settling for an average partner would mean admitting she is now average herself. So she chooses an unwinnable war instead. Which ultimately leads us to the bedrock of this entire worldview. Section 6, the biological argument.
Here, all these societal observations get anchored in harsh evolutionary mechanics. The ideology actually mocks what it calls the lifestyle illusion, the careers, the condos, the pets. It argues that a job is just a transactional relationship with a totally replaceable corporation. None of that carries your DNA forward. Instead, raw evolutionary utility, your biological legacy, is presented as the single undeniable truth. A woman's true purpose, in this view, is to create life, and when that biological window closes, she enters a profound depression because the evolutionary assembly line has permanently shut down.
This whole argument culminates in an incredibly unforgiving metaphor. The creator says, when the milk goes sour, you pour it down the drain, you don't put it back in the fridge and hope it turns into wine. Wow! By comparing female aging to milk going sour, they're driving home their absolute belief that biological expiration is a finalized, totally irreversible market correction. It is a wildly brutal analogy designed to completely shock the listener. The point they're making is that no amount of modern feminism, social constructs, or corporate empowerment slogans can rewrite this fundamental biological reality.
Which leaves us to consider the ultimate, terrifying implication of this entire ideology. It paints a picture of a generation experiencing profound existential terror from realizing they bet their lives on a completely fleeting asset. It begs the question, if our identity and value are strictly tied to a biological timeline, what happens when we inevitably outlive our evolutionary utility? It's a stark, highly challenging perspective on society, but understanding it definitely changes how you look at the modern dating discourse we see online every single day. Thanks for exploring this one with us.